Picture yourself standing in an ancient tomb, 4,000 years after its last occupant took their final breath. The golden death mask gleams in your flashlight, and you suddenly understand a terrible truth. The teenage pharaoh within didn't die from illness or accident. He died because his parents were brother and sister. His grandparents were brother and sister. Every breath he took was a struggle against the genetic poison flowing through his veins. Imagine growing up as a living god, but your body betrays you. Your spine curves painfully. You need a walking stick at age 16 while servants whisper about the curse that follows your bloodline like a shadow. This was the reality for Egypt's rulers. For 3,000 years, the most powerful people on earth systematically destroyed themselves, believing their blood was too divine to mix with mortals. Instead, they created a laboratory of human suffering that would echo through history, from the heretic king Akhenaten to the tragic boy king Tutankhamun. Before we descend into these golden tombs to uncover this dark truth, if you enjoy learning about the hidden tragedies of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let us know what part of this story shocks you the most. We're about to travel through millennia of tragedy together, and it's incredible to connect with you all from around the world. To understand how the most powerful people on earth became victims of their own making, we must journey back to the beginning. The pharaohs didn't set out to destroy themselves. They thought they were preserving something sacred. They believed their blood was a gift from the gods, an essence that must never be contaminated by mortal lineages. Picture the first pharaoh who decided his sister was the only woman worthy of his bed. He looked at his subjects, farmers, craftsmen, ordinary people, and felt a deep revulsion at the thought of his divine nature mixing with their common blood. His priests would have nodded approvingly. His advisors would have calculated the political advantages of keeping power consolidated within a single family. No one considered the price his children would pay. The logic seemed flawless. Pharaohs weren't just kings. They were living gods, the earthly embodiment of Horus, divine descendants of Ra himself. How could a god marry a mortal? How could divine blood be diluted with human weakness? The answer was obvious. Gods must marry gods. Brothers must marry sisters. The bloodline must remain pure. What began as religious conviction quickly became a cultural obsession. Generation after generation, royal siblings grew up believing that marrying each other was not just normal but necessary. Each union was like adding another drop of poison to a well. The first generation might show only minor problems, slight jaw irregularity, unusual facial features. The priests would interpret these as marks of divine favor, but the genetic damage was accumulating, building layer upon layer until the very foundation of the bloodline became toxic. Every genetic disaster was reinterpreted as divine will. A royal child born with a clubfoot? A blessing. A prince who died at 20? Called home by the gods. A princess unable to bear living children? Chosen for a higher spiritual purpose. The Egyptians were brilliant. They built pyramids that still stand, developed mathematics that astounds us, but they were blind to the truth staring them in the face. The genetic time bomb was ticking in every palace nursery, in every royal marriage bed, and nowhere was the explosion more visible than in the dynasty that would shock Egypt to its core. In the scorching desert heat of the 14th century BCE, a child was born who would grow up to become one of history's most controversial pharaohs. But before Akhenaten became the heretic king, he was simply a boy trapped in a body that betrayed his divine claims. His skull was elongated. His hips were wide like a woman's. His chest developed breasts that no amount of royal clothing could hide. When the prince finally became pharaoh, he did something unprecedented. He ordered artists to portray the royal family realistically. For the first time, royal art showed elongated skulls, protruding bellies, and strange proportions. This wasn't an artistic revolution, it was the tragic confession of a king tired of living a lie. The paintings from his reign are haunting. They show a family that looks almost alien, a documentation of genetic damage so severe that even royal propaganda couldn't hide it anymore. Akhenaten married the famous Nefertiti, and together they had 6 daughters. Court records hint at sons who died in infancy, their small bodies unable to survive the genetic burden. Perhaps the king's religious revolution, his abandonment of Egypt's traditional gods, was born from desperation. If the old gods had cursed his bloodline, maybe a new god would show mercy. But even a new god cannot fix genes poisoned for generations. Akhenaten died young, as did most men in his family. His revolution died with him. But the genetic damage continued. passed like a curse to the next generation, to a boy who would become even more famous for his tragic inheritance. His name was Tutankhamun, and he entered the world in 1341 BCE, already carrying his father's curse. Imagine being 9 years old and struggling to walk. The boy king's left foot was turned inward, what we call clubfoot. His spine was curved. His chest was malformed. The irony is staggering. He was worshipped as a living god, while his body failed him daily. Subjects would prostrate themselves before a teenager who needed walking sticks just to cross a room. Over 130 of these canes were found in his tomb, not symbols of authority, but desperate aids for a crippled god-king. His wife, Akhenaten, was also his half-sister, carrying the same genetic burden. Their attempts to have children resulted in tragedy. 2 tiny, stillborn daughters were found mummified in his tomb, silent witnesses to a genetic dead end. At 19, the young king's compromised immune system finally surrendered. A simple case of malaria, something a healthy person would survive, became a death sentence. As he lay dying in his golden palace, perhaps he understood what his physicians could not, that his suffering was not divine will, but the inevitable result of choices made by ancestors who valued purity over health. You might think Tutankhamun's death would have taught Egypt a lesson, but power has a way of making people forget inconvenient truths. 1200 years later, when Alexander the Great's empire shattered, his general Ptolemy claimed Egypt as his prize. Surrounded by temples depicting divine pharaohs married to their sisters, the Macedonian conqueror decided to repeat Egypt's greatest genetic mistake. For 300 years, the Ptolemaic dynasty perfected the art of genetic isolation. The family tree became a tangled ladder, with the same names repeating endlessly as brothers married sisters. By the time the legendary Cleopatra VII was born in 69 BCE, the experiment had run for 250 years. The myth of her as a ravishing beauty is likely just that, a myth. After centuries of intensive inbreeding, she more likely inherited the pronounced facial features and jaw deformities that marked her line. What made Cleopatra remarkable wasn't her appearance, but her intelligence, one of the few traits that survived the genetic catastrophe. She spoke 9 languages, understood mathematics and philosophy, and navigated the treacherous politics of the dying Roman Republic with breathtaking skill. Her famous relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony weren't just political alliances, they were genetic lifelines. She desperately needed to introduce new blood into her poisoned lineage. But Roman politics proved more brutal than Egyptian genetics. Her children by the Romans, who represented the last hope for genetic redemption, were systematically eliminated by her rival, Octavian. When Cleopatra chose suicide over Roman captivity, she ended not just her own life, but a 3,000-year experiment in human destruction. The irony is devastating. The Ptolemies had conquered Egypt militarily, but Egypt conquered them genetically. The evidence of this tragedy is documented in art and preserved in mummies. The characteristic jaw deformities, the elongated skulls, the physical frailties, these weren't artistic choices. They were genetic reality. But the invisible damage was worse. Compromised immune systems, hormonal imbalances, and neurological issues that ancient art could never show. Modern genetics explains what the ancient world could not. When siblings reproduce, harmful recessive genes, normally rare and masked, have a terrifyingly high chance of showing up. Generation after generation, these harmful genes accumulated, creating a spiral of destruction that the royal families couldn't escape because they couldn't understand its cause. Come back with me now to that golden tomb where we began. Look again at Tutankhamun's death mask. This time, see past the divine symbolism to the human tragedy beneath. This wasn't just art, it was a desperate attempt to hide the reality of a boy whose every breath was a struggle against the accumulated mistakes of his ancestors. Their suffering wasn't meaningless if we learn from it. The Pharaohs' tragedy reminds us that no amount of power, religion, or tradition can override the basic laws of biology. They wanted to be remembered as gods, but they became humanity's greatest teachers about the importance of genetic diversity. Their pain became our knowledge, their suffering, our wisdom. As we leave their tombs, we carry their stories with us. We remember them not as divine kings, but as human beings who deserved better. Their voices, silenced by time, still echo with a simple message. Choose humanity over ideology, health over tradition, love over power. Remember us, they whisper from their golden tombs, and learn from our mistakes. If you were captivated by this journey into the past, please hit the like button, subscribe for more hidden histories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Every story deserves to be told.